The fluorescent lights of the Terran Research Institute cast harsh shadows across the polished floors, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a prison than a scientific facility. Dr. Sarah Kellum adjusted her new identification badge as she followed Dr. Amanda Cross through the underground corridors, her footsteps echoing off sterile walls lined with observation windows that offered glimpses into containment cells. The specimens we house here represent the most significant xenobiological discoveries in human history, Dr. Cross explained with clinical detachment, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades reducing living beings to research data. Each subject provides invaluable insight into non-terrestrial biology and potential threats to human expansion. Sarah nodded politely, though something about the terminology made her uncomfortable. Through the reinforced glass, she caught sight of various alien life forms in sterile environments that looked nothing like natural habitats. The creatures seemed listless, their movements suggesting resignation rather than the curiosity she expected from intelligent beings. "This is our most significant acquisition," Cross said, stopping before a cell marked with numerous warning signs and biohazard symbols. Subject 23. Captured during the pacification of Kepler 442b after her people launched an unprovoked attack on our colonization efforts. Sarah peered through the reinforced window and felt her breath catch. The being inside looked remarkably similar to a human woman, tall and graceful with flowing dark hair that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Her most distinctive features were her ears, elegantly pointed and slightly larger than human proportions, giving her an otherworldly beauty that was both alien and familiar. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered without thinking. "She's dangerous," Cross corrected sharply. That beautiful creature killed 12 soldiers during her capture and injured dozens more. The pointed ears aren't just aesthetic differences, her entire species demonstrates enhanced sensory perception and physical capabilities that make them formidable adversaries. The alien woman sat motionless in the center of her sparse cell, her golden eyes staring at nothing with an intensity that suggested deep thought rather than emptiness. Despite her captivity, she maintained perfect posture, radiating dignity that seemed unbreakable despite the circumstances. "How long has she been here?" Sarah asked, noting the absence of any comfort items or environmental enrichment. 6 months. We've learned more about her species' physiology than we ever imagined possible. Their healing capabilities, sensory range, and cellular structure are fascinating from a research perspective. Sarah watched as the alien's pointed ears twitched slightly, responding to sounds beyond human hearing range. Has she communicated at all? Shown signs of language comprehension? Cross laughed with bitter amusement. "Oh, she understands perfectly. Probably speaks our language better than half our staff. But she refuses to cooperate with any research protocols. Destroys equipment, resists medical procedures, and maintains this insufferable attitude of superiority despite being completely at our mercy." "What about basic needs? Food, water, social interaction?" "She receives sustenance when she earns it through compliance," Cross replied with satisfaction. "Behavioral conditioning has proven effective with most specimens. A few missed meals usually encourages cooperation. Though I'll admit, this one has shown remarkable stubbornness." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "When did she last eat?" 4 days ago. She destroyed a neural scanner during routine testing, so she's learning the consequences of destructive behavior. The hunger will break her eventually, they always do. Through the glass, Sarah noticed the subtle signs of weakness in the alien woman's posture, the way her hands trembled almost imperceptibly. Yet her golden eyes remained alert and defiant, focusing on some internal strength that sustained her despite physical suffering. "The beauty is deceptive," Cross continued, seemingly unaware of Sarah's growing discomfort. "Remember, her people attacked our peaceful colonists without provocation. Every human death on Kepler 442b is partially her responsibility. We're conducting vital research that will help protect future colonies from similar threats." The alien woman's gaze suddenly shifted, meeting Sarah's eyes through the glass with startling directness. For a moment, the connection was electric, intelligence recognizing intelligence, suffering acknowledged by empathy. Sarah saw no monster in those golden depths, only exhaustion, pain, and a profound sadness that spoke of losses beyond imagining. She can sense observation, Cross noted clinically. Enhanced awareness is common among her species. Useful for hunting, which explains their effectiveness in combat situations. But Sarah saw something else entirely in that direct gaze, recognition, perhaps even hope, as if the alien woman sensed a difference in this new human observer. The moment stretched between them, a silent communication that transcended species barriers and spoke to something fundamentally shared. Don't let her fool you, Cross warned, noticing Sarah's fascination. That innocent act has deceived researchers before. Dr. Williams spent weeks trying to establish rapport with her before she nearly broke his arm during what he thought was a peaceful interaction. Sarah nodded absently, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Williams had fundamentally misunderstood what he was dealing with. This wasn't a monster or a weapon, this was a person, reduced to a specimen through fear and prejudice disguised as scientific inquiry. As they moved on to other sections of the facility, Sarah found herself glancing back at the cell, catching one last glimpse of the alien woman who had already begun to haunt her thoughts. Tomorrow, she would return to begin her official duties, but something had changed in that moment of recognition. The question wasn't whether she could help, it was whether she could live with herself if she didn't try. The morning briefing felt like a celebration of cruelty disguised as scientific progress. Dr. Cross stood before the assembled research team, presenting charts and graphs that reduced a sentient being suffering to data points on a holographic display. Subject 23's behavioral modification program is showing promising results, Cross announced to murmurs of approval from the senior staff. 8 days without food has significantly reduced her aggressive responses and property destruction incidents. Sarah sat in the back row, fighting to maintain professional composure as she watched her colleagues nod appreciatively at what amounted to systematic torture. The alien woman, she'd learned her designation but still no name, had been without sustenance for over a week, yet according to the security footage Cross was displaying, she maintained the same dignified posture despite obvious physical deterioration. Notice how her defiance behaviors have decreased by 60%, Cross continued, using a laser pointer to highlight surveillance clips. The hunger is finally overriding her pride. We should see complete compliance within another week. Dr. James Harrison, a behavioral psychologist who seemed to enjoy his work far too much, raised his hand. Have we considered combining nutritional deprivation with sleep disruption? The combination typically accelerates behavioral modification in most species. Excellent suggestion. We'll implement random light cycles starting tomorrow. Sarah watched the footage showing the alien woman sitting motionless in her cell, her pointed ears drooping slightly with exhaustion. Even in her weakened state, she refused to lie down or show vulnerability, maintaining her vigil as if expecting rescue that would never come. Dr. Kellum, Cross called suddenly, causing Sarah to straighten in her chair. As our newest team member, what's your assessment of our approach? Sarah felt every eye in the room focus on her, waiting for her response. She could feel the trap in the question, agree with the torture and compromise her principles, or object and mark herself as a liability to the program. I wonder if we're approaching this from the wrong angle, she said carefully. If the goal is communication and cooperation, perhaps building trust would be more effective than breaking her will. The room fell silent except for a few uncomfortable coughs. Cross's smile turned predatory. Trust, she repeated with mock surprise. Dr. Kellum, this creature's people slaughtered innocent colonists. Trust is a luxury we can't afford when dealing with hostile alien species. Our job is to extract information that will protect human lives, not to make friends with our subjects. But what if the intelligence we could gather through cooperation is more valuable than what we can extract through coercion? Sarah pressed, knowing she was walking into dangerous territory. Dr. Harrison snorted with derision. Rookie idealism. These aliens don't think like us, Kellum. They don't respond to kindness, they see it as weakness to exploit. The only language they understand is strength. Cross nodded approvingly. Which brings us to our next phase. We've acquired footage from the Kepler 442b incident that should provide additional psychological leverage. The holographic display shifted to show what appeared to be military combat footage, human soldiers in powered armor advancing through crystalline structures while explosions bloomed in the background. Sarah realized with growing horror that she was watching the destruction of an alien city. We'll be showing Subject 23 selected footage of her people's defeat, Cross explained with clinical enthusiasm. Sometimes visual confirmation of helplessness succeeds where physical discomfort fails. Sarah's stomach churned as she watched buildings that looked like living art crumble under human weapons fire. In the footage, she could see figures with pointed ears fleeing through streets that sparkled with alien architecture beyond human imagination. This is what happens when species choose aggression over cooperation, Cross continued. Subject 23's people learned that lesson the hard way. Now she'll learn it on a personal level. The briefing continued with discussions of enhanced interrogation techniques and psychological pressure points, but Sarah could barely focus on the words. Her mind kept returning to those golden eyes she'd seen the day before, the intelligence, the dignity, the profound sadness that seemed to carry the weight of unimaginable loss. After the meeting, Sarah made her way to the containment level, ostensibly to familiarize herself with the facility layout. She found herself walking past Subject 23's cell, unable to resist checking on the alien woman's condition. What she saw made her stop breathing. The alien had collapsed against the far wall of her cell, her usually perfect posture crumpled with exhaustion. Her dark hair, which had shimmered with health the day before, now hung limp around her face. But her pointed ears still twitched at Sarah's approach, and when she lifted her head, those golden eyes still blazed with unbroken spirit. For a long moment, they stared at each other through the reinforced glass. Sarah saw no monster, no deadly weapon, no hostile alien threat. She saw a person who was slowly dying while maintaining her dignity in the face of systematic cruelty. The alien woman's lips moved slightly, forming words too quiet to hear through the glass. But Sarah could read the shape of them, and her heart clenched at the simple, devastating message. Please. Sarah glanced around the corridor, confirming she was alone, then placed her palm against the glass. The alien woman struggled to her feet and moved closer, placing her own hand against the barrier that separated them. Through the transparent aluminum, Sarah could see the fine bones of her fingers, the elegant length of her alien digits, the way her skin seemed to have a subtle luminescence despite her weakened state. They stood like that for several minutes, two beings from different worlds sharing a moment of connection that transcended species barriers. Sarah felt tears she hadn't expected burning her eyes as she recognized the profound injustice of what was happening here. When footsteps echoed down the corridor, Sarah quickly pulled her hand away and continued her tour, leaving the alien woman standing alone against the glass. But something had changed in that moment of contact. A decision had been made, though Sarah didn't yet understand what it would cost her. That night, she lay awake thinking about golden eyes and pointed ears, about dignity maintained in the face of cruelty, and about the difference between monsters and the people who create them. The psychological warfare escalated beyond anything Sarah had imagined possible in a legitimate research facility. Dr. Cross had transformed Subject 23's daily routine into a carefully orchestrated campaign of mental torture, using the alien woman's obvious intelligence and emotional depth as weapons against her. Sarah watched through security monitors as Cross personally supervised the latest session, forcing the alien to observe footage of her homeworld's destruction while restraints prevented her from looking away. The alien woman, who Sarah had privately begun thinking of as having her own name and identity despite the clinical designation, sat rigid in the specially designed chair, her pointed ears flat against her head in what was clearly a sign of extreme distress. Fascinating, Cross murmured into her recording device as tears flowed down the alien's face. Subject demonstrates emotional attachment to destroyed population centers. Note the physiological responses, increased heart rate, elevated stress hormones, and what appears to be grief behaviors similar to human patterns. On the screen, the alien woman finally spoke, her voice carrying that musical accent that made even her pain sound beautiful. You call me monster while you murder children. Sarah felt her heart break at the raw anguish in those words. This wasn't the voice of a killer or an aggressor, this was someone mourning the loss of everything she had ever known and loved. Excellent! Cross exclaimed with genuine excitement. First voluntary communication in 6 months. The psychological pressure is finally yielding results. But Sarah could see what Cross was missing in her clinical enthusiasm. The alien woman's tears weren't signs of breaking, they were signs of absolute rage being held in check by tremendous willpower. Her golden eyes had taken on a dangerous intensity, and her restraints creaked ominously as her hands clenched into fists. Perhaps we should consider that she might be reaching a breaking point in the wrong direction, Sarah suggested quietly. Cross waved dismissively. Emotional manipulation is a precise science, Dr. Kellum. I've broken more subjects than you've probably ever seen. Another day or two of this treatment, combined with continued food deprivation, and she'll be completely compliant. The alien woman proved Cross catastrophically wrong within minutes. When the footage showed what appeared to be children with pointed ears being killed by human weapons, the alien's composure finally shattered. But instead of the helpless despair Cross expected, Subject 23 exploded into a fury that seemed to draw strength from depths no one had suspected. Her restraints, rated to hold beings 3 times human strength, snapped like paper as she surged to her feet. The monitoring equipment surrounding her chair disintegrated under her hands as she destroyed everything within reach with methodical precision. Warning alarms screamed throughout the facility as she reduced thousands of dollars of sensitive instruments to twisted metal and shattered components. Sedate her. Cross screamed into her communicator, but the alien woman moved with fluid grace that made the security team's tasers useless. She seemed to anticipate their every move, her pointed ears twitching as she tracked multiple threats simultaneously. It took 8 guards with neural disruptors to finally bring her down, and even then she fought until unconsciousness claimed her. When the chaos finally ended, the testing chamber looked like a war zone, and 3 guards were in the medical bay with injuries that suggested the alien had been showing considerable restraint in her previous captivity. Chain her, Cross ordered with cold fury as medical teams sedated the unconscious alien. Hands, feet, and secure her to the wall. If she wants to act like a wild animal, we'll treat her like one. Sarah watched in horror as they dragged the limp form back to her cell and secured her with restraints that looked more suited to a medieval dungeon than a modern research facility. Heavy chains attached to reinforced anchor points held her arms and legs immobile, forcing her to sit against the wall in a position that would become agonizing within hours. "This is torture," Sarah said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Cross turned on her with eyes that held no warmth or humanity. "This is science, Dr. Kellum. If you can't handle the reality of xenobiological research, perhaps you should consider a career change." But as Sarah looked at the unconscious alien woman chained like a dangerous animal, she realized that Dr. Cross was wrong about what constituted reality. The real monster in this facility wasn't the creature with pointed ears, it was the system that had convinced intelligent people that cruelty was acceptable in the name of science. That evening, Sarah returned to the containment level during her shift, finding the alien woman conscious but barely able to lift her head due to the positioning of the restraints. Her golden eyes were dulled with pain and exhaustion, but when she saw Sarah, something flickered in their depths, recognition, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement of another living being who saw her as more than a specimen. Sarah stood before the cell, meeting those eyes through the glass, and made a silent promise. She didn't know how or when, but she would find a way to show this woman that not all humans were monsters. Sometimes the most important revolutions began with the smallest acts of kindness, and Sarah was ready to start a revolution of one. The alien woman seemed to sense her thoughts because, despite everything she had endured, she managed the faintest smile. It transformed her face completely, revealing the person beneath the prisoner, and Sarah knew there would be no going back from this moment. Sarah's hands trembled as she bypassed the security protocols on Subject 23's cell, her heart hammering against her ribs with each electronic beep that confirmed her access codes were working. The night shift left most of the facility empty except for a skeleton crew of guards, and she'd spent weeks learning their patrol patterns for this exact moment. The heavy door hissed open, and she stepped into the cell carrying a simple canvas bag that contained items that could cost her everything: fresh bread still warm from the commissary, clean water in a thermal bottle, basic medical supplies, and a small pillow from her own quarters. The alien woman looked up from where she sat chained against the wall, her golden eyes widening with surprise and suspicion. Weeks of systematic cruelty had taught her to expect tricks and traps from humans, and Sarah could see the wariness in every line of her weakened body. "I'm not here to hurt you," Sarah said quietly, settling cross-legged on the floor at a safe distance. "I brought food. And water. And..." She gestured helplessly at the medical supplies, "whatever help I can offer." The alien stared at the bread as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. Her pointed ears twitched forward slightly, and Sarah realized she was probably analyzing scents and sounds to determine if this was another psychological experiment. "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper, but in that musical accent, it carried the weight of months of suffering and betrayal. Sarah met those golden eyes directly, letting her own emotions show. "Because it's right. Because you're a person, not a specimen. Because what they're doing to you is wrong, and I can't stand by and watch anymore." For long moments, they stared at each other across the small space. Then, slowly, the alien woman leaned forward as much as her restraints allowed and reached for the bread with shaking hands. Sarah had to help guide it to her, and their fingers brushed briefly, alien skin warm and surprisingly soft despite everything she'd endured. The alien ate with desperate hunger, trying to maintain dignity even as her body betrayed how close to starvation she'd become. When Sarah offered the water, tears began flowing down her cheeks, the first emotion she'd shown beyond anger since her capture. "My name is Lireleth," she whispered between sips of water, and Sarah felt her heart skip at being trusted with something so personal. "Sarah," she replied. "Dr. Sarah Kellum." "Sarah." Lireleth tested the name, making it sound like music. "You are different from the others. I can sense kindness in you. It has been so long since I felt kindness from a human." As Sarah opened her medical kit, Lireleth began to speak about her world, her people, and the truth about the conflict that had led to her capture. Her people, the Zephyrians, had been explorers and healers who'd encountered the human colony by accident during a routine scientific expedition. They'd attempted peaceful contact, offering medical aid to colonists suffering from an alien plague. "We can heal with touch," Lireleth explained as Sarah carefully cleaned infected wounds left by her restraints. "My people have always used our abilities to help others. But your military saw our healing powers as a potential weapon and attacked without warning." Sarah felt sick as she realized the truth. "You weren't attacking the colony. You were trying to save it. The plague would have killed them all within weeks. We could have cured it in days." Lireleth's voice carried infinite sadness. "Instead, your people chose fear over hope, violence over healing." The wounds on Lireleth's wrists and ankles were worse than they appeared, infected from weeks of constant chafing against poorly designed restraints. As Sarah applied antibiotic cream, she felt Lireleth's muscles tense with pain she was trying not to show. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered, not just for the physical pain she was causing, but for everything her species had done. "You are not responsible for their choices," Lireleth replied gently. "You choose differently. That gives me hope." They talked quietly as Sarah worked, sharing stories of their worlds and their lives before this nightmare began. Lireleth spoke of crystal cities that sang with harmonious frequencies, of gardens where plants and people lived in symbiotic relationships, of a culture built on healing rather than harming. Sarah found herself opening up about her own dreams of peaceful contact between species, her belief that understanding was possible between different forms of life, her growing horror at what she discovered in this facility. "Your healing abilities," Sarah said carefully as she finished bandaging the wounds, "could they help other people? Humans with diseases we can't cure?" Lireleth's eyes lit up with the first real joy Sarah had seen from her. "Oh yes. Cancer, genetic disorders, neurological damage, all of these respond to Zephyrian healing techniques. My people dream of sharing our gifts with the galaxy, of creating bonds between species through mutual aid and understanding. Then maybe, Sarah said, we can find a way to show them what you really are. Footsteps in the corridor forced Sarah to quickly pack her supplies and prepare to leave, but as she reached the door, Lireleth called her name softly. Sarah. When she turned back, Lireleth was looking at her with an expression of profound gratitude mixed with something deeper. You gave me more than food tonight. You gave me hope that not all humans are like those who destroyed my world. I'll come back, Sarah promised. As often as I can. I know you will, Lireleth smiled, and in that moment, Sarah understood that she'd crossed a line from which there would be no return. She was no longer just a researcher observing an alien subject, she was someone who cared deeply about a remarkable person who happened to be from another world. As she sealed the cell door behind her, Sarah realized that Lireleth had given her something precious too, a purpose worth risking everything for. Sarah's secret visits had transformed both women in ways that neither could have anticipated. Over the course of several weeks, she'd smuggled food, medical supplies, and most importantly, compassionate human contact to Lireleth, who had begun to recover not just physically but emotionally from her ordeal. During their whispered conversations in the depths of night, Sarah learned about Zephyrian culture, their philosophy of healing, and Lireleth's own background as what translated roughly to a life mender, someone who dedicated their existence to healing others regardless of species or origin. In return, Sarah shared her own dreams of peaceful interspecies cooperation and her growing horror at the systematic cruelty she witnessed daily. Your people have such potential for good, Lireleth said during one of their clandestine meetings, her golden eyes reflecting the dim emergency lighting as Sarah carefully tended to her healing wounds. I have seen it in you, in your kindness. But fear makes them choose darkness over light. Sarah had begun to understand the true scope of what had been done to Lireleth's people. The Zephyrians hadn't been aggressors, they'd been healers who'd stumbled upon a human colony ravaged by an alien plague and attempted to provide aid. The military's response had been to interpret their advanced healing abilities as potential biological weapons and launch a preemptive strike that had destroyed an entire civilization. I wish I could undo what we did, Sarah whispered as she helped Lireleth eat another smuggled meal. You cannot change the past, Lireleth replied gently, but you can choose what kind of future to create. Every act of kindness creates ripples that spread outward in ways we cannot imagine. Their relationship had evolved beyond doctor and patient, beyond captor and prisoner, into something that transcended species entirely. Sarah found herself looking forward to their meetings with an intensity that had nothing to do with her professional obligations and everything to do with the remarkable person Lireleth had revealed herself to be. But their secret couldn't last forever. Dr. Cross had noticed Lireleth's improved physical condition and increased surveillance accordingly. On the night she finally caught Sarah in Lireleth's cell, Sarah was helping the alien woman stretch muscles weakened by months of restraint, their hands clasped together in an exercise that was both medical necessity and intimate connection. Well, Cross said as security guards surrounded them, her voice dripping with vindictive satisfaction. Dr. Sarah Kellum, violating every protocol in the book to play house with our prize specimen. Sarah felt her career and possibly her freedom crumbling around her, but surprisingly, she felt no regret. Standing next to Lireleth, she'd never been more certain of the righteousness of her choices. You call her a specimen, Sarah said with quiet dignity. But she's the most remarkable person I've ever met. Her people could have healed diseases that plague humanity, could have taught us about peaceful coexistence. Instead, you turned her into a prisoner and called it science. Touching, Cross sneered. Security, arrest Dr. Kellum for treason, insubordination, and contamination of research materials. But as the guards moved forward, something extraordinary happened. Lireleth stepped between them and Sarah, and for the first time since her capture, she stood at her full height, tall, elegant, and radiating an authority that made everyone in the room pause instinctively. This human is under my protection, Lireleth said, her musical voice carrying absolute conviction. She has shown me that not all of your species are monsters. She has proven that love can exist between different worlds. love? Cross laughed harshly. You're a research subject, not a person capable of. Lireleth moved with fluid grace, reaching Sarah despite her restraints, and gently cupped Sarah's face in her hands. Her golden eyes were blazing with emotions too powerful for words, and Sarah felt her breath catch as she realized what was about to happen. You gave me food when I was starving, Lireleth said, her voice carrying the solemnity of someone making an oath. You gave me water when I thirsted. You gave me dignity when I had nothing left. You saw me as I truly am, not as they tried to make me. The kiss that followed wasn't desperate or grateful, it was a promise, a vow, a claiming that transcended species and circumstances. Sarah felt warmth flow through her unlike anything she'd ever experienced, and suddenly understood that Lireleth's healing abilities went beyond physical restoration to something deeper and more profound. When they separated, Lireleth turned to face Cross and the stunned security team with the bearing of the healer queen she'd been before her capture. You called me monster, she said with quiet intensity, but this woman saw my truth. She chose compassion over cruelty, understanding over fear. She is my bonded one now, chosen by my heart and claimed by my soul. Sarah felt the truth of those words resonating through her entire being. Whatever happened next, whatever consequences they faced, she knew that this moment had changed everything. Love had bloomed in the most unlikely place, between beings from different worlds, proving that connection transcended all the barriers that fear and ignorance had tried to construct. Where she goes, I will follow, Lireleth continued, her pointed ears standing proud as healing energy began to flow through her touch, mending not just Sarah's minor cuts and bruises but filling her with strength she'd never known she possessed. What threatens her, I will fight. You may continue to call me monster, but she has seen my heart, and I claim her as mine. Cross stepped back, her face pale as she realized the situation had spiraled completely beyond her control. The alien woman she'd tortured and starved was no longer the broken prisoner she'd expected to find, but someone who radiated power and purpose that made the entire room feel charged with electric potential. This is impossible, Cross stammered. You can't just, this isn't how research subjects behave. Research subjects, Lireleth said with gentle correction, are people reduced to objects by those who have forgotten their own humanity. But Sarah remembered hers, and through her kindness, she reminded me that hope still exists in this universe. The healing energy flowing between them intensified, and Sarah gasped as she felt her own latent empathic abilities, dormant gifts she'd never known she possessed, awakening in response to Lireleth's touch. Suddenly, she could sense the emotions of everyone in the room, Cross's fear and fury, the guards' confusion and growing uncertainty, and beneath it all, Lireleth's boundless love and fierce protectiveness. You see, Lireleth said, though her eyes never left Sarah's face. She was meant to find me, just as I was meant to choose her. Your people speak of fate and destiny, this is both, woven together by the cosmic forces that guide hearts to their true homes. Security alarms began blaring throughout the facility as Lireleth's healing powers, no longer suppressed by starvation and despair, began affecting the entire research complex. In cells throughout the building, other alien prisoners felt their strength returning, their hope rekindling, their will to survive blazing back to life. What have you done? Cross demanded, but her voice shook with the realization that she was witnessing something far beyond her understanding or control. I have chosen love over fear, Lireleth replied simply. And through that choice, I have found my purpose again. Sarah showed me that your species is capable of extraordinary compassion. Now I will spend my life proving that different worlds can create something beautiful together. As if summoned by their bond,